Right, our next presentation is Numbers Talk, Now Make Them Tell a Story. This will be presented by John Muller. John previously spent 3 years as a senior football writer at The Athletic, with his writing also appearing in 538 and the New York Times. He's currently building a soccer startup and player recruitment consulting for clubs. John?
All right, this one's going to be a little different. A few months ago, Ravi Ramaneni called me to ask if I wanted to speak at a new soccer analytics conference in Houston. My first thought was, hell yeah, I love attention. I told him I'd do it. We hung up. Then I had my second thought. My second thought was, shit, everybody in the room is going to be smarter than me. What am I supposed to talk about? Hi, I'm John Muller. If you're scouting me for the first time, this is my FBRF bar chart. Statistics classes taken in my entire life, 0. Coding, if you add up all my R and Python skills, maybe you get to like half a language. Useless humanities degrees, 3, so I'm above average at being useless. But I don't even have a PhD. Embarrassing. What I have done is I've watched a lot of soccer, and I've written a lot of words about it for websites like The Athletic and 538. And somehow that got me here, on this stage, getting your attention. As a string-type guy in a room full of float-type geniuses, I'm not here to tell you all how to do numbers. I want to talk about words, which are the data that ultimately drive decisions. Want your boss to listen to you? My number one piece of advice is to wow them with your precision and attention to detail by displaying all the numbers in your reports to 9 decimal places. Bosses love decimals. Can't get enough of them. If for some reason that doesn't work, though, maybe try something different. Maybe just tell a good story. In the 1001 Nights, a king gets his heart broken and deals with his feelings very calmly and rationally, like all bosses do, by deciding he's going to marry a new virgin every night and have her head cut off in the morning. Replace virgin with manager, by the way. And you've just described half the sporting directors in soccer. Anyway, when it's Scheherazad's turn to marry the king, she's sort of attached to her head, so she comes up with a plan. She decides to entertain the king by telling him the best story she can think of, one about a merchant and an angry genie who's about to kill him. The merchant begs for his life. Please, he says, I have a family. And the genie tells him to go home, say goodbye to his family, tidy up his affairs, and come back to the same spot in exactly 1 year to die. The king doesn't like this story. He loves it. He's hanging on every word. But before Scheherazade gets to the end, she sees the sun beginning to rise outside the window, and she stops, mid-sentence, just as a character is raising the knife. Well, now the king can't have her beheaded, because he's got to hear the rest. So Scheherazade survives to pull the same trick the next night, interrupting her story at dawn again, and the night after that, and it keeps working night after night, because people, even kings, are curious animals. We need to know what happens next. To bring this back to soccer, every decision to sign a player is a real-life cliffhanger. We're all on the edge of our seats, trying to guess how a move will work out. But if it's your job to present data to inform that decision, don't just give your boss a number. Tell them a story. Your machine learning model says player A will add 0.3 more expected goal difference at left wing than player B. Who cares? Boring. Shut up, nerd. Try this. Player A came up from his club's academy and broke into the first team 3 years ago at 18. He earned a lot of minutes as a teenager, which we know is usually an indicator of future success. Only one small problem. He was god-awful in those minutes. One of the worst players in the league by our model. When the coach who gave him his debut got sacked, the new manager sent this kid straight to the bench, and it looked like he might rot there for the rest of his contract. But something happened when he would get subbed on. He started passing forward, taking players on. The numbers went up. It was like he'd been scared to make a mistake, but now he was playing with nothing to lose. When the starting winger got hurt, player A got a run of games, and he performed well above league average. Then the starter came back, the kid was exiled to the bench again, and scouts and journalists moved on. With player B, you know what you're getting. He's an experienced journeyman, a capable squad player. But our model has seen enough guys like player A to indicate there might be something special there if someone would just give him a chance. Telling a story isn't complicated. It's just a sequence of events. This thing happened, then that other thing happened. But when someone strings together events like that, we start to form expectations about where the story is going. And those expectations spark our curiosity. Like Scheherazad's king, we have a deeply human need to know what happens next. This is a room full of soccer quants, so you all know who Ian Graham is, right? Longtime head of analytics at Liverpool, one of the pioneers in this field. I have tremendous respect for Ian, so I hope he'll forgive me for saying this. But he is exactly who you think of when you hear the word nerd. Like if you called Central Casting and told them you needed somebody to play a soccer analytics PhD in a movie, they would send you Ian's headshot. Jurgen Klopp, on the other hand, is your stereotypical jock. 6'3", barrel chest, big booming voice, and a 1,000,000-watt smile that can turn murderous when he's mad. So it must have been a little intimidating for Ian to have to go to the manager one day and tell him that, according to his research team's models, Andy Robertson, this fullback who Liverpool wanted to sign, was a defender who couldn't really defend. Don't kill the messenger. Klopp didn't care. Imagine Ian's huge sigh of relief when he got the 1,000,000-watt smile instead of the murdery one. The coach explained that he wanted players with what he called extreme characteristics. As long as they're really good at one thing, he figured he could find ways to cover up the weaknesses. Ian's models agreed with that approach, actually. Robertson added so much possession value with his dribbling and passing that he expected it would outweigh some of the defensive lapses. They went through with the signing, and Robertson became a key part of maybe the greatest Liverpool team ever built. All the people in this story, the nerd, the jock, the extreme attacking fullback, are flat characters. They have one key trait, they don't change much, and you pretty much get the whole picture as soon as they're introduced. Some soccer players are like that. Adama Traore, for example. Dribbles better than just about anyone on the planet and contributes absolutely nothing else. Do you remember Arjen Robben? That guy could be walking down the aisle at his own wedding, and you still knew he would find a way to cut inside and shoot. We like to reduce people to flat characters because it makes them funny and easy to remember. But most players, like most people, are round. They're a mix of good and bad. They change with their circumstances. They contradict themselves, they develop, they grow. How do you tell a story about a round character? The trick is in trying to give your audience a glimpse of their rich interior life. Novelists can cheat at this. They can just tell you what their characters are thinking. But for playwrights whose stories are acted out on the stage, they have to show you who their characters are by what they say and do. Aristotle summed up the playwright's job in the Poetics. All human happiness and misery, he said, takes the form of action. Soccer analytics are more like a play than a novel. We know players have these interior qualities called skills, but we can't really measure them directly. All we see are their actions on the pitch, which are shaped partly by their skills, but also in large part by what's happening around them. We form an impression of them based on interactions with other people, with their teammates and their opponents. When we tell stories about soccer data, we should remember that we are not omniscient narrators. Don't pretend that counts or action values give us direct knowledge of skills. Emphasize a player's social context. Not only does it make for rounder characters, it gives us a better view of who they really are. Player A. He needs a name now, right? Let's call him Luigi. Anyway, there's this weird thing in Luigi's numbers, right? Whenever he plays in midfield with a midfielder named Yoshi, our model loves him. That run of starts last season when Luigi was killing it, he was lined up next to Yoshi. But when he plays with this other midfielder named Koopa, he regresses to his teenage self. Lots of backward passing, not a lot of dribbling, not a player we would want to sign. Here's the weird part. Luigi almost never passes to Yoshi, but he and Koopa link up all the time. It seems like they got great chemistry. So why are the vibes so much better when Yoshi's on the pitch? Well, if you watch the tape, the answer is obvious. Yoshi is constantly making these underlapping runs that drag defenders away, making space for Luigi to cut inside and put balls into the box. That doesn't show up in the numbers. The model just says Luigi was bad, now he's good. But it's not measuring skills, it's measuring actions, and our actions are shaped by the people around us. What's the difference between a story and a plot? The novelist E.M. Forster had a memorable formula. The king died, then the queen died. That's a story. The king died, Then the queen died of grief. That's a plot. A story asks what happens next. A plot asks why. In 1979, a playwright named Robert McKee moved to LA to try to write movies. He succeeded, sort of. He sold some scripts. He even won a national screenwriting contest. The only problem was that none of his stuff ever actually made it to the big screen. For a while, he found work as a studio story analyst, writing notes on other people's screenplays, maybe trying to understand why theirs got made and his didn't. But his big break, when it came, wasn't a movie, it was a teaching gig. McKee started giving a story seminar at USC's film school. He turned that into a best-selling screenwriting guide called Scory. And he became one of the most famous people in Hollywood without ever actually making a film. Even though he called it story, McKee's real subject is plot, the clockwork that makes movies exciting. He has all these crazy charts about plot structure that look like tactics diagrams you'd find in the most unhinged depths of soccer coach Twitter. But McKee's basic idea is a simple one that you've seen 1,000 times before, even if you didn't realize it. A movie starts with a character and a setting. We get to know the protagonist's world just enough to start to care about them. But then something happens that turns that world upside down. Luke finds a droid with a mysterious message for someone named Obi-Wan, or Ilsa walks into Rick's gin joint and asks to hear as time goes by. McKee calls these inciting incidents. They throw the protagonist's life out of balance, and the rest of the movie is about trying to get that balance back. What's an inciting incident in soccer analytics? It could be as simple as an unexpected number, something that changes what we thought we knew. Why did Luigi's possession value get better after he got benched? If you can get your audience not just curious about which way the numbers move, but thinking about what's causing it, you've set a plot in motion. According to McKee's formula, the rest of the movie is a series of conflicts while the protagonist tries to get what he wants. If you're telling Luigi's story, for example, he wants to restore balance by proving he's actually good. Maybe you describe why he struggles when Koopa's on the pitch, not making runs. Maybe you talk about the new coach who benched him, but then he started earning more minutes in his sub-appearances. These conflicts get us invested in his growth as a character. A plot builds to a climax, which McKee says should be accompanied by a value reversal. When Luke blows up the Death Star, he ignores the computer, he uses the Force, he flips from a normal guy to a Jedi. The whole movie has been building to this change, but it's still dramatic. As Aristotle put it, the end of a story should be surprising but inevitable. Every transfer is the climax of a story about value reversal. You think a player is more valuable than other teams that could have signed him, and you've got data on why this move is going to work out. If this story has a happy ending, it'll be surprising but inevitable. Metafiction. Oh man, we're jumping straight into the grad level stuff now. You're all gonna have useless humanities degrees when this is done. In the 1960s, some fiction writers started to feel like maybe this whole storytelling business was played out. It had all been done before. All the stories have been told, all the plots and characters with cliches by now. And these guys were novelists. Imagine if they had to write about soccer games every day of their lives. Anyway, the response from some of the more experimental types was to start complaining about the artificiality of fiction in the fiction itself. One of my favorite stories is called Lost in the Funhouse by John Barth. It gets all of 3 sentences into a story about a boy on a family holiday to the seashore before the story veers off into a long digression about italics, which the narrator helpfully informs us are employed in fiction stories, especially for outside, intrusive, or artificial voices, such as radio announcements, the texts of telegrams, newspaper articles, etc. They should be used, and here he uses italics, sparingly. The joke here is that the author is intentionally jolting us out of the illusion of the story. We want to be immersed. Okay, there's this boy, he's by the seashore, what happens next? And instead he's telling us, look, none of this is real. I'm just using these artificial techniques. We do eventually find out what happens to the boy. He falls in love, of course. But a funny thing happens as the author keeps interrupting his own story to comment on it. Instead of distracting us from the boy's story, the digressions about technique make us more attentive to what's going on. We're enjoying the story, and we're thinking about how it works at the same time. I think there's a lesson here for soccer analytics. When we talk about numbers, we don't always talk about where they came from, or some of the more subjective methodological choices involved. We're afraid of boring our audience, or scaring them off, or worse, losing their trust by admitting this stuff is sort of artificial. It's not the absolute truth about soccer. And for some audiences, maybe that's true. Just give me the facts, your boss says. Or, better yet, skip the nerd stuff and just tell me if this guy's any good. But what I've found over the years is that most people are genuinely curious about what these numbers mean, and the more honest you are about what they can and can't tell us, and how your choices shape the data, the more people are inclined to listen to you. Why am I standing up here telling you all this stuff that's not really about soccer data? Since the dawn of soccer analytics conferences, which wasn't that long ago, people have been talking about two things. One is the importance of context. Soccer is hard, it's weird, it's messy, and you can't do soccer analytics without thinking carefully about the context of the data you're working with. Someone will say this at every conference, and they'll always be right. The other thing you're guaranteed to hear about at these things is the importance of communication. We've done all this hard work and built these great models, somebody says. Now, how do we get anyone to listen to us? What I'm trying to suggest here is that these are really the same conversation. Storytelling, the kind of communication that grabs people's attention, is all about providing context. Story, pure narrative, is putting events in temporal context, one after the other, just like analyzing soccer events in the context of a possession or seasons in the course of a career. Character is how we interact in social context. In other words, it's team effects, league effects. Plot is causal context, the inferential question at the heart of statistics. Metafiction, that scary sounding word, it's just methodological context. It's the second section of every research paper you've ever read. If you're doing soccer analytics right, you're already thinking about these things all day, every day. But when it comes time to present our work, we tend to leave out the interesting stuff, the stuff that makes it come alive, thinking we're letting the numbers speak for themselves. Friends, stop doing this. Tell the whole story. People might just listen to you, and you'll live happily ever after. The end.